You're listening to the Woman of Value podcast. You are about to hear the story of a woman who is following her dreams and passions and creating positive change in the world.
There are so many of us out there who aren't sharing those wonderful stories that we have. And I think it's so important to get them out there, however small you think it might be, or however irrelevant you think it might be. There's someone there who will be affected by that and is inspired. And I think it's so important that we all share where we've come from and who we are.
My guest today is Shola Kaye. She is a professional speaker, a public speaking coach, and the author of How to Be a Diva at Public Speaking. She works with women business owners to help them win new clients and monetize their expertise with powerful communication. Her work has appeared in the BBC, Harper's Bazaar, and Forbes, and you might notice she has an accent. Welcome to the podcast, Shola.
Thank you, Sandy. I was so happy when you asked me to join you.
You and I both appeared together on the same podcast, and that's how I first found you on The Dating Den with Marty Batista. And I loved what you had to say. I also overcame a lot of shyness and became a public speaker and gave a TEDx talk. So we had a lot in common. And I just said, you'd be a great Woman of Value podcast guest. And so I reached out. We are going to first go through your aha moment when you first realized that you needed to make a change and claim your value. Tell us about the steps leading up to that moment and the moment itself and all the actions that you took following that moment that helped you lead the empowered life that you lead today.
As a child, I was fostered, and from the age of about 3 months until I was 11, I lived with a different family. And it was quite a typical thing to do in those days. You'd have a lot of families moving, sort of emigrating, and they didn't have a setup where they could work and look after their kids. And so they would find families for their kids to stay with. So I was super happy with my foster family, but I always knew that at a certain age, I'd have to go back and live with my parents. And I think that made me feel quite powerless as a kid. And I felt like I didn't have much of a voice. And that led to me being, I guess, quite passive, through my sort of teens and even into my early adulthood. And I found myself in a corporate career that I wasn't enjoying at all, mainly because other people had said, Shola, why don't you become a management consultant? Why don't you? And I remember just thinking, oh, all right then. My own feelings and opinions almost played no role in the direction that I was moving in. And I had a couple of corporate jobs. I lived in the States for a number of years, and I was working as a business consultant. And I remember that my head of HR said to a colleague, "Why is Shola so quiet? What's wrong? What is wrong with her?" And I was completely embarrassed, really mortified. And eventually I turned that situation around and was very happy in that role, and they were sad to see me go. But then I took another role in the UK. I came back home and I was in a account director role. And I was supposed to be leading these meetings, working with a lot of C-suite execs. And again, this whole lack of voice and what am I doing here? And just feeling quite unempowered around the whole situation. This came up for me. And it was right around the time of 9/11. And one of our big clients was British Airways. And at that time, the whole aviation industry just went into a real low after that event. And the company I was at, they had to sort of look at where they were spending their money. And they decided that I wasn't worth the salary that I was making. And I remember, walking out of my boss's office and just thinking, I will never work for a corporate in this capacity again. Something has to change. I cannot do this anymore. And at that point, I had to leave the flat I was living in because it was in quite a nice part of London, quite expensive. Moved in with my sister. And there was no part of me that said, I'm going to look for a similar job again. There was just something inside me that just, this is a watershed moment. Something has to change. And at that point, I got very involved in personal development. I trained to be a life coach. And I started going to a lot of seminars and reading books. And my sister said to me, well, look, this is a real moment where you can make something happen for yourself now. You don't have to do the same old as before. And one day I was reading a book by I think Brendan Burchard. Have you heard of him, Sandy?
Sure.
Yeah. It's funny, a lot of people here in the UK haven't heard of him when I mention his name. But I was reading a book by him, and there was a chapter in there on speaking. And weirdly, as I was reading that chapter, I just started to cry. And it wasn't, oh my gosh, how sad, I'm dreadful at speaking. But it was more, I think it was like my soul just saying, hey, there's something for you here. And I thought that was a weird response, but I just sort of ignored it for a couple of more years. And then started thinking, well, why don't I take some speaker training? And in that period where I had sort of stopped working in corporate, I'd started taking singing lessons. And that, of course, helped me to find my voice and express myself, with power, at least in terms of vocalizing, even if it wasn't the message. And I joined a couple of bands and was doing a bit of professional singing. So by the time this urge to do some public speaker training came along, I was very comfortable with people watching me and with being the center of attention. And so I actually took to speaking and really loved it, and ended up winning an award. I got an award for being the top speaker in the UK within perhaps a couple of years of taking up speaking. And it just made me realize that sometimes when we get no's in our life, it can be a force that's driving us into a different direction. And I'm grateful now for what happened in my corporate career, because I now go into corporates, but on my own terms, and I train and teach them and do public speaking and keynote speaking. And just today I closed 3 corporate clients, but from a position of strength and power as me, rather than a wannabe, I'm going to try and do this corporate thing, even though it doesn't necessarily suit me, or I'm not ready for it just yet. So that's really my big moment, and or my aha moment. And I don't want any woman to be in a position, where I was, feeling so frustrated or undervalued. And that's why I've particularly chosen to work with women, to help them find their voices and to share that story, so people realize, however they feel about speaking or speaking up or being heard, there's someone like them out there who's managed to turn that around, and that they can too. So sorry, that's quite a long a long story.
It's a great story. And I love how you heard a voice that told you public speaking is where you need to go, and you ignored it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I think this is important for people to hear, because we often have these little messages and they keep knocking on our heads. It's like, okay, the universe is trying to give you a message and you're ignoring it, or it's the same thing just keeps on happening. And when we finally stop and pay attention and realize it's where we need to head, that's when all the good stuff starts to happen. And you found your life purpose, and you used your pain to make it your message.
Very much so. And there are so many of us out there who aren't sharing those wonderful stories that we have. And I think it's so important to get them out there, however small you think it might be, or however irrelevant you think it might be. There's someone there who will be affected by that and is inspired. And I think it's so important that we all share where we've come from and who we are.
I so agree with you. And I think a lot of people, it's very common to think my message isn't important enough. So as a speaking coach, how do you help people find their story? How do you help them mine for the story that really is uniquely them, and convince them that it's worth sharing?
Really good question. Well, in my I have the sort of Diva framework, which is D stands for being a dynamic and lively speaker. I stands for being inspiring, as in sharing stories and inspiring others with those stories. B is about being of value, which is all about your podcast, I guess. Being of value, having a great structure, knowing your audience. And then A is around being authentic. And I typically find that when we work on the authentic part, the authenticity, combined with sharing storytelling frameworks for people to use, it's that connection between the two that starts people thinking, well, who really am I? What are my values? How would that come out if I wanted to share something with somebody to reveal what those values are? And typically that's enough to start to spark people's memories and ideas, and thinking, well, yeah, that I have this story, let's try it in that framework. Actually, that story is very impactful. This could be my story that I share with people. And I had a client come to me a little while ago. He's a solicitor, and he works with a lot of people who've been wrongfully imprisoned, and makes sure that they, don't have to go get seriously long sentences. He works with those sorts of people. And he had suppressed the story that he had of how, as a younger man, he had been arrested. Somebody had burgled something at his office, and he's a black guy. There was a black guy that committed the burglary, and somebody saw someone running away, and then the police came and they arrested him, even though he had the keys to the office. He was in a pinstripe suit, all these things that ridiculous. So he was arrested, taken, spent the night in a prison cell, and he'd just suppressed all of this. And it came back. And then that now will form the basis of his keynote, which is around inspiring other people to not give up and keep pushing forward, even when life is against them. So I think people often forget, or they suppress some of the most important stories that they can use to help others with.
I so agree. I mean, I see this all the time in my practice. And in fact, some of the work I do is in helping people find their purpose. And I love looking at their life stories, the pivotal moments, and finding like 4 or 5 stories, and then finding the highs and the lows, and then mining those stories for the values and who that person became, and then putting it all together to find their purpose statement. And I just did this with a very young woman who went through a lot of trauma, and all of her trauma was kind of minimized. It was like, oh, that was nothing. A lot of that was nothing. And you go, wait a minute. And I remember doing this years ago when I first started coaching. A woman had gone through something so horrible when she was a very small child. And her parents blamed her for something that she should have been celebrated for. And just pausing and having someone else reflect, wow, you were amazing. Like, you were 7 years old and you did that. So it's just, oh, now I can appreciate who I was and who I became. And telling those stories really inspires other people, because we find ourselves in other people's stories.
Yeah, it's just so powerful. And I know it sounds like a cliche, doesn't it, now, with people being urged to tell stories all the time, but there's always somebody out there that needs to hear that again, and just make that effort to share who and what they are, that they've been through.
Absolutely. I mean, story has been passed from generation to generation for forever. This is how we share cultures. This is how we understand each other, remember each other. I belong to Toastmasters, and when somebody gives a speech that's very technical and it's a lot of numbers and the slides are full of facts, and my head is just, I'm like checking my phone, I'm like, I'm totally lost. But if somebody shares a story, I'm totally there. I completely remember it. And, and that's how we are as humans. We attach to the story, not to the facts and the numbers.
Exactly. That's so true. And when I'm working with people on technical information, I always say, well, what's the story? How is this going to help a human being, or a company, or an animal, or whoever it might be? We need to hear the story around why this thing exists.
Yes.
And once they get in touch with that, then it helps to make it so much more relevant to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also in the dating world, which is where I spend most of my time as a dating coach, I see people having conversations all the time that don't share the deeper meaning, the why. When you're not sharing your values, you're not sharing those deeper stories, you're not connecting. And so we need to do it everywhere in our lives, not just on a stage or in a presentation, but in our everyday conversations.
So true. So true. Mm.
So take us, Shola, to the present and tell us what you're creating in the world right now.
Mm. Well, at the moment, I'm working with quite a few female business owners to help them with finding their voices and also going into corporates. And I'm finding that there's a lot of need now, particularly among people who are sort of more technically minded, to improve on their communications and those softer skills so that the workplace is a much more harmonious place for them and so that they can keep moving up in their careers. Because although there's an enormous need for technical knowledge right now, technical knowledge without the ability to communicate with other human beings often, doesn't result in people really achieving the success that they could. So I do a lot of work around there, and also working with. I'm still a professional singer, and my plan is to really start to use my singing voice as well as my speaking to help to motivate and inspire women at large events. So this is something it's in the pipeline, but I see myself really speaking at maybe events with several thousand or several hundred people, but really uplifting people and inspiring them and helping them to transform through the power of words, but also the power of the emotions that music can bring out of people. So that's where I really want to go with what I've got.
I love that. I see that as you integrating all of you, this holistic approach to your life, to authenticity, to showing up fully, integrating the singing and the speaking and using your voice in all ways. I just think that's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's amazing. I mean, talking about stories again, quite often we change career or we have one sort of job that we work in and then we flip to something else and something else. I think it's more and more common these days. And I have clients that come to me and they may have had a career for 10 or 15 years in, say, TV production, and now they're a health coach. And they feel like they're a newborn baby, in terms of, I can't share my old career. I can't tell people that I haven't been doing this for years. And I really encourage them to share where they've come from and try and integrate those skills that they had in their previous job that they used so regularly with what they're doing now. Because I think people need to hear others in their backstories. People don't necessarily expect that to be effective, you must have been doing this for 20 years. You could maybe have done it for a year, but with all the knowledge you have combined in your experience, that makes you better at what you're doing. So, to my mind, I think with a lot of people, they're hiding this backstory, but it could actually make them a bigger whole if they bring it in to what they're doing and they really share that. So it's going back to storytelling again, but not hiding parts of yourself. Why? Why?
Yeah, it makes it a richer experience. I agree. I agree. And having recently started a new business and feeling like a complete fraud and not appreciating all that I was bringing, even though I knew it in my heart,
Mm-hmm.
all the skills that I've been teaching to my dating coaching clients had to do with owning their value. It all started within, and it all stemmed from speaking up and showing up and all the things that I'm doing now in the rest of my life with the new business. So I'm bringing this to the corporate world, which I've never worked in. So I had a story in my head. Well, I've never worked in corporate, so I don't really understand corporate, and they're not going to really respect me because I don't know corporate. And then everybody's telling me from corporate, you know what, you offer something that we don't have because you come with a new point of view and you're an outsider. And also I'm an artist and the dating coaching, and so it's bringing it all together. And I actually was trying to think of a speech that combined how dating coaching what dating coaching teaches you about recruiting, and so combining both, because marketing and dating are so similar.
Yes.
So I'm working on some ideas for that and speaking for something called Disrupt HR, which is, I don't know if they have it in the UK. Do they have that?
I don't know. There's quite a few conferences with Disrupt something, so there could well be Disrupt HR. Yeah.
So
Wow.
Disrupt HR is like it's a fast, the slides are all they're all on one reel. So all the speakers come up and their slides automatically advance, and you have like 5 or 7 minutes to give your whole speech. And I've done some of those formats before. There's something called Ignite, which also, I don't know if do you have that?
Yes, yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah,
it's a good challenge. It's like
sounds amazing.
Anyway, yeah. So I love how you're integrating all the parts of you for the future, and that's where you're moving. And I'm curious, for the future, what's your dream for other people? Like, what contributions do you want to make in the world and hope for others?
Yeah. I think it's around speaking up, but sort of not having a hesitation to say what you have to say. Because I think with women, we often overthink things before we share our opinion. And I think when people understand how to share that, so they're not worried about, oh, well, is this being blurted out and sounding a little bit raw? They're able to think on their feet and really share what it is from the heart, but in such a way that they're not afraid that it will go down in the wrong way. I think it's going to be so important. Well, it is so important. And so helping people have those sorts of skills and then go out in the world and speak to others and inspire, and then in turn, whoever they've inspired goes out and does something similar. I feel like it can really create a huge snowball. So to my mind, it's really about people being free to be themselves, which is really what it means to have a voice.
Yeah, that freedom is such a resonant term. I think so many people live in the space of pleasing others, of conforming, of thinking they have no choice, and realizing that you really are a choice, and that if you just tap into your own inner wisdom and use what you have, it's so inspiring. And I love the snowball ripple effect of one person inspires the next person, inspires the next person.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Yes. Yeah.
Great visual, especially as the snow is falling right outside my window right now.
Wow, really? We've had this weird heat wave in London.
Oh, yeah.
It's been 21 degrees, which is, I guess, what, 70 something, 75?
Oh, my God.
And in February, it's never, ever this warm. So everyone's like, oh my gosh, what's happening to the world?
Oh, yeah, it's pretty scary. We had a light snowfall today. It's been freezing here in the East Coast. Yeah, so it's time for the lightning round, and this is where I get to ask you lots of quick questions, and hopefully we'll extract some priceless nuggets of knowledge from you, and we're going to help our listeners get deeper into your brain and your wisdom. Are you ready?
Okay, let's try this.
Okay. So, Shola, what was the number one thing holding you back from becoming a woman of value?
I think it's fear of being judged and found wanting. And that's made me, just stopped me from really pursuing my dreams. And I just felt I had to be more conventional and fit in.
Yeah. None of that conventional fitting in stuff anymore.
No.
All right, another question. What is something you failed at that taught you an important life lesson?
What did I fail at? Well, I guess, I've given you a story of failure there where I was actually, kicked out of a job. So I think that's probably my biggest fail so far. And I guess now what I've learned from that is, not to take no for an answer, and that sometimes something that seems negative at that moment can actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise. And to not be too quick to judge what's happening in the present, because quite often in the future present, it's actually a good thing.
It's true. Yeah, don't judge. Just don't judge at all. I think that's good advice. And I watched your video I think it was this morning's newsletter about your TEDx talk, and some things that happened that you shared. and that you learned some important life lessons from that too. So can you share some of that with our audience?
Absolutely, absolutely. So about, I don't know, six months ago, a year ago, I was asked to do a TEDx talk, and I had all these ideas, but this TEDx talk was going to spark off a different area of my business, and it was, going to be watched by all these people, and it had to be a certain way. And it's quite funny because I think quite often when we get a big opportunity, all the things that have worked for us in the past that we routinely do very well, sometimes those things can go out of the window because we try so hard to be perfect that we end up sabotaging ourselves and we forget about being excellent. We're trying for perfection, and then excellence isn't attainable because we just get in the way. And so, for example, as a speaking coach, I always tell people you want to lock down your presentation with enough time to practice it and really get it inside you. Not that you have to learn it word for word, but you just have it so inside you that you can be present with the audience and enjoy being in the moment and not worry about what's the next word that's got to come out of my mouth. And I remember on the morning of the TEDx itself, I was still thinking, oh, can I change that story? Can I have this? And, this had been going on all the way through, right up to the actual day of the presentation. So, of course, that very much destabilized me. And instead of feeling comfortable, I'm like, oh, I'm still running through the lines at the last minute and worrying. And then what happened is when I stepped up to speak, the mic wasn't turned on. And because of my experience as a singer, quite often things go wrong. Little bits go wrong when you're in the middle of a gig, and you just plow on and just ignore them and things go right again. But of course, because the TEDx is recorded and it's not just the people in the room, it's the wider audience that watches it. What I should have done is stopped, waited for the mic to come back on, started again. Because of course, every time something goes a bit wrong, it just sort of topples you slightly from your place of stability. And then the third thing that happened was I'd worn an earring, and the earring was banging against the headset, the mic. So all the way through, as I'm speaking, there's this glump, and I think glump, and then a glump. Like, oh boy. So all I was thinking was, oh gosh, when's the next banging noise going to come in? As opposed to, right, I've got this great thing to share with this audience, and I can't wait to connect with them. And I just remember feeling so, when it was over, like, oh, thank goodness. Wanting to collapse in a corner somewhere. And luckily, some of the problems with the sound were rectified. But unfortunately, what happened, the original video was put up, and then I got the sound sorted out and we put a replacement up. But of course, when a video first goes up, you get a lot of likes and views and comments and things. And by having to replace that with the cleaned up version, all of those were wiped away. So I say to people now, well, if you find my TEDx talk, it does look like there's a bit of tumbleweed blowing around. Ooh, the desert was lonely. But, I like to share screw ups with my clients. And I think it's important that, especially in this world of social media and Instagram perfection. And I think it's really important to people to see that not everything goes right. And the amount of work that people put in to make everything look like it's perfect all the time. And there doubtless are always bloopers, whatever you call them. But quite often they're just erased or, pushed to one side. So I want people to get the naked truth.
The naked truth is important because we don't relate to perfect. We relate to humans who are authentic and real. And I have to tell you that I could relate to that story because the day before my TEDx talk, my son said to me, your opening sounds horrible. You have to change it. And you know what? He was right. It wasn't me. It sounded fake. And so, and I think, what I'm hearing from you is you have such a need for authenticity. And when you're so connected to that, you keep refining and refining because it has to feel real to you. And so I changed it, and I practiced it like crazy, and I was able to give my talk, but the slides weren't working, and I only had 2 slides. And I got up and I turned it on, and it was somebody else's presentation.
Oh
And
no.
I'm like, oh, here it is. But but the most amazing thing about it for me was that I had never really spoken on a stage, and I got this opportunity to give a TEDx talk before I was ever anywhere near ready. So that plunged me into, high speed for a public speaking career before I was ready at all. And I think it sort of fast tracked me really quickly because I put so much pressure on myself to do well. And I think, when you have that need to be perfect and you're thinking about all the people who are going to see you, and there's a lot of feeling of judgment, and it's important to overcome that. So my question for you is, like, when you give a speech like that, and it's such an important speech, what do you do to calm yourself down and to get into the present moment, even though your earrings are bouncing around and stuff?
Well, for me, the big one is always that I'm there to be of service, and that it's not about me, it's about the audience. And that typically helps me through all sorts of situations, because then it makes me realize that, hey, just turn the spotlight off yourself and turn the spotlight onto your audience, because there are people there who are sharing their time, they're giving their time, their energy to be in your presence. And the quicker you honor them by being present with them, the better. And that typically is what I always try and think, okay, it's about them, it's about them. And I guess that's the main thing that I keep in mind. Yeah.
I think when you step into what you're really there for, because that is the truth, it just takes the focus off of being in your head and out into where the focus should be, to giving your message.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it came back to me what it was. I think for me, the TEDx format, I struggled a bit because I love to be interactive when I'm speaking. So I love a lot of hands up. What do you think about this? Turn to your neighbor and share your ideas on X, Y, and Z. And I, especially as an introvert, because every single time you hand things to the audience, the energy will always lift again. Whereas when you've got one person who's trying to shoulder the whole thing, and I'll do this, it's all about me, then quite typically, things can hopefully work well. But if there is a sort of flag in the energy, or the person's a little bit self-absorbed and it doesn't connect that well with the audience, then I think there's a greater likelihood that things don't always work out as well as they could do. And I think for me, with that TEDx format, it's not my preferred style of speaking to audiences. So I think that's another reason why it kind of didn't sit so well with me. Because again, when you're interacting, it's very much about them, and people sort of sense the generosity of, oh, okay, she's not going to talk the whole time. She wants me to get some transformation from this. So I think that's the other point I wanted to make.
And I can relate to that so much, because I'm an introvert and I love the interaction too. And it's true. I never really thought of it in terms of introversion and taking the focus off of me, but that makes so much sense. And I've seen TED Talks where they actually have audience participation. And yeah, so I think, maybe we can push the envelope a little bit and do it in the way that really works for you. We don't have to follow rules. Yeah, next TEDx and next TED Talk. Great. So if you were to give advice to a woman who has given up her value in the past and wants to become a woman of value, what would you say to her?
I would say to take some time to go inside and really figure out who you are. Look at your responses to situations in your life. Look at what you've really enjoyed. Look at what you haven't enjoyed so much, and just really get to know yourself. And I'd say to become your best friend, and value yourself as you would a really close friend. And I think from there, you will start to, especially looking at likes, dislikes, opinions, etc., really start to get to know yourself. And I think when we know ourselves well and we value and like ourselves, then that's the first step to actually kind of emerging as somebody that is seen to value themselves in the wider world.
I like the, seeing yourself as your best friend. It's hard for people to do that. They're so mean to themselves. And so do you have any advice for how to start that process?
Good question. I'm an NLP practitioner. And for those of you who've not heard of NLP, basically it stands for neuro-linguistic programming, which sounds ridiculously scary, but all it is taking images and sights and sounds that we typically would repeat again and again in our heads that might lead to feeling feeling not enabled or feeling negative, and replacing those with, maybe empowering music, bright colors, just replacing those images and sights and sounds and thoughts and feelings with ones that empower us. And there's a technique that I love, which you can just Google and find scripts for, and it's called the swish pattern. And typically when I would find myself, there's certain times, maybe every time you go and stand up to speak, or when you take your makeup off at night in the mirror and it's quiet and your brain starts, the monkeys start to come out and start to feed you with negative information and negative self-talk. There's certain moments, I think, where we kind of, those repetitive negative statements come to us sort of more strongly. And I've used the swish pattern just to myself a few times to actually break those patterns. So when I'm, in front of the mirror getting ready to go to bed, and I start thinking, oh, Shola, why did you do this? Or what's wrong with you? You're always like this. And I've used that swish pattern to replace those negative thoughts and things that creep in with positive ones. And if you do the swish pattern correctly, what will happen is those negative thoughts will just disappear. And even if they're not replaced by this kind of rosy, beautiful, angelic music and so on, you might just find that there's nothing there, which I think is amazing. So that's just check it out on Google. You'll find texts for that and scripts. So that's what I would recommend as a way that you can get rid of negative thoughts and unempowering thoughts quite easily, within half an hour.
That's a useful tool. I'm going to have to Google that as soon as we're done and put it up in the show notes.
Cool.
I love these kind of tools because so many people are living in these negative spaces and have their thoughts are taking over. And it's just so important to know that we have control over that. And there are tools that we can use, because I think just people don't even know where to go with it. They're just constant racing and negativity and replaying messages from people in your life who have told you you're not good enough and you need to get better grades and all these things that just play in that loop, which is terrible.
Yes, agreed.
All right, next question. This one is about books. Do you have any books to recommend that have helped you on your journey?
Well, I love reading, so there are lots, but I've narrowed it down to 3. And one of them is, as a communications coach, obviously communication is important to me. And one of them, which I read quite recently in the last couple of years, is a book called Captivate by Vanessa Van Edwards. And I think she calls it the science of charisma. And it's an excellent book. It takes you all the way through how to make a great first impression, through to how to look at people's faces and understand their real, true response, rather than what they quickly, sort of paper over the real response and then smile. And it helps you to sort of read people better. Also, it covers storytelling. It covers. It's a fantastic book, so I really suggest that people have a look at that. And the second book is a book by Marissa Peer, who is a hypnotherapist, and that book I think it's just called Confidence, and it's written in a sort of hypnotic style, so that even just the reading of the book itself, and just doing a few of the little mind exercises that crop up in the book, is enough to make you feel confident more confident by the end of the book. So that's been an excellent one. And then another one I love is a book called The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And it's a big book. I think I've got the audio book and it's like maybe 15 hours or something. But what I did is every morning when I'm getting ready for work, whatever, I'll just play a little bit of it. And just when it finishes, I just go back and start it again. And I just found it's really empowering, really uplifting, lots of great stories. And it's a book I absolutely love.
So I've read The Success Principles, or at least parts of it, many years ago. I think it was one of the first self-help books I got as I started to become a coach. Mm-hmm. And I had written a blog post called The Blue Notebook. I think it was called The Blue Notebook. And do you remember the notebook story where you come into a conference and you have a yellow notebook on your seat? Mm-hmm. And the instructor says, if you don't like the color of your notebook, you can change it. You don't have to settle for what you got. And it was just like, oh, I've been doing that my whole life. So it was just, it really struck me because just knowing that we are at choice and we don't have to settle was a big one for me. But I'm going to definitely look into these. I love the Captivate book. That sounds so captivating.
It really is. It's great. Yeah.
So thank you. It's always interesting to hear what people are reading. And now for your favorite quote. Do you have a favorite woman of value quote?
I have a quote from Oprah. And the quote is that the highest honor on earth that you will ever have is the honor of being yourself. Your only true job as a human being is to discover why you came, why you were here. And that to me, I think whenever I have moments where I doubt myself or I'm questioning my direction, when I read that quote, it just makes me feel, it's all okay. Just figure out your true north, be yourself, and everything will just happen from there.
That's beautiful. I never heard that one.
Okay.
I love it. Oprah is a woman of value for sure. And I love that, she came from humble beginnings and from tough beginnings. And she has inspired so many people to believe in themselves, because if she can do it, we can do it, right?
Yeah, she's incredible. Really.
Yeah. I lived in Baltimore when she was on the news there. So I remember her from her days before she did talk show.
Wow, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
All right. So we have one more question, and this is a big one. This is the legacy question. How would you like to be remembered, Shola?
Great question. I would say somebody who is, let's say, a generous communicator, as in wanting to listen and wanting people to express themselves, and somebody who is a quiet leader, so doesn't need to posture and big up themselves, but in the same way, but is allowing people to is empowering people and inspiring them and leading in a gentle way, and to be remembered as somebody who just wants to be a part of other people's transformation. Yeah, it's a bit of a whiffly response there, but I wish I could sum it up in 2 words, but no.
No, it doesn't have to be 2 words. It's bigger than 2 words, and it's describing who you are and who you're stepping into. And so it's, you're already living this life and you're continuing to grow who you are, which is really a beautiful and inspiring thing to watch.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Shola, how can our listeners get in touch with you? And if you have a free gift, please let us know what that is.
Sure. So you can find me, I'm sure you'll put all the social media links, but my website is sholakaye.com, and that's KAYE.com. And I have a brand new freebie, which is called the Ultimate Checklist. And if you go to sholakaye.com/ultimate checklist, all one word, you will be able to pick it up. And what it is, it's my top tips for making a presentation in terms of before, during, and after. So before, what is it that you need to prepare? It's not so much about creating the speech itself, but it's all those, especially if you speak for your business, there are certain things that you need to make sure that you've had ready to really maximize each opportunity. So it might be around what you need to do to check in with the organizer, or finding out how many people will be there, or whether it's okay for you to promote your business, or how are you going to have people know more about you, but in a way that's not salesy. So there's a bunch of things that you can check off there before the presentation. Then during, so once you arrive at the venue, what's the best way to get yourself comfortable very quickly? Who should you check in with? What are some bits and pieces you might need to incorporate in your presentation, in terms of, maybe name checking certain people or thanking the audiovisual people. And then afterwards, which to my mind is as important as during, which is who should you speak to? How to make yourself available so that if potential clients come up and speak to you, they're not feeling put off because somebody's hogging your attention, and you can't sort of circulate, or what to say to people to make sure that you can continue the conversation. So it's really, you can use it whether you speak in a corporate setting, whether you do small talks, whether you do large talks to big audiences. But it's my gift to my followers that's, all the insights that I've obtained over the years through speaking and through singing professionally, are gathered into this checklist.
That sounds extremely valuable. So I hope you all go over to Shola's website and grab a copy. And I want to thank you, Shola, for being a woman of value, for inspiring others to be a woman of value, and for continuing to grow as a woman of value to inspire others to do the same.
Thank you so much, Sandy. It's been a real pleasure.
If you would like to step more fully into your value, grab a free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Woman of Value on my website, thewomanofvalue.com. Just click the link at the top of the homepage. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to click the subscribe button in your listening app. And if there's something in this episode that inspired you, please share it with others, because the more we share these inspirational stories, the more women of value we will have in this world. I'll see you next time.